All right, so next topic here is a big one, interesting for today specifically. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg from Washington said the FTC's lawsuit was legally insufficient because it did not plead enough allegations to support monopolizing claims against Facebook. So remember we were talking about Facebook having, as one of the big companies in big tech that was targeted for antitrust and monopolization. Well, there was a big blow to all those cases today, and Facebook finished above $1 trillion market cap today because of this, because they were like, you don't have enough evidence, or you didn't prove what you said you were going to prove, or it's not substantial enough. So let's kind of go through this for a second, break it down. So they said the FTC's lawsuit was legally insufficient because it did not plead enough allegations to support monopolizing claims against Facebook. This is interesting because they're correct. When you define a monopoly, it is something that takes an undue amount of pricing control and that adversely affects consumers. So if a company basically corners a market and says, I'm the person you can buy a car from, I can charge you any price I want because where else are you going to go to get a car? That would be a monopoly, right? Because you are cornering the market and making people, hurting consumers by your pricing scheme. When we have multiple companies, they have to compete against each other, so prices are always kept in some kind of floating fair market price. Because if there's three people that can sell you cars, if you don't like that one, you go to the next one. Everyone will keep trying to find a price level that's most acceptable. But the problem is that our laws aren't built for the kinds of size, power, and influence that tech companies have. There is no harm, and they argue this successfully. There is no harm to consumers. We don't pay for any of these services. How can it be hurting the consumer? You're right, but it's not a question of hurting the consumer. It's a question of the actual ownership of data. It's the question of influence and control. The fact that and the one of the things the FTC alleged was that that Facebook had engaged in unlawful monopolization by buying up its competitors such as Instagram and WhatsApp instead of competing with them, and would want them to unwind or divest those investments back into individual companies. The problem is when you don't pay for any of these services, how are you going to measure actually hurting consumers? You're not. So our laws, in this case, in terms of size and influence, are not written for this type of company. So to apply them will be very, very difficult because there is no harm to me. I can have Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. They're all free. They don't cost me anything. So it doesn't actually hurt me for Facebook to own all of it. But they are becoming a conglomerate of companies and controlling most of the technology. And you can see things like this in the Cambridge Analyticas, or who's selling my data and where is it being used and how is it being sourced. And they make most of their money on revenue and tracking. And the argument is now, you should make your data personalized. It should be a personal asset that we have the right to own, and we have the right to say what people can and cannot do with it. But again, our laws aren't structured that way. So it's going to be very interesting going forward how this is going to work. And the judge also dismissed the states. About 46 states came up with a case. They dismissed it out entirely, saying on the ground that they had waited too long to bring their claims. And the states had argued that Facebook degraded personal privacy and exploited consumer data because it had no rivals to keep it in check. So that was just a legality thing. They said, hey, you didn't bring these up in time, so we're going to dismiss the case. So there's a lot of work to do on this front, but it certainly is a big blow against the kind of the first big news to come out since we discussed that the government and states and everybody were considering these antitrust suits. So it just definitely is a big point to note, is that our laws weren't structured this way. So there's going to have to be a change to the language of the laws, or a set of new laws, and specifically to actually, I think, make this stick and make this effective. Um, so the I think that's really the kind of the gist for this. All right, hit $1 trillion U.S. market cap, and remember, this is also interesting that the company Facebook suffered 19% loss in 2018 when it came out about Cambridge Analytica helping Brexit occur, helping Ted Cruz become president, helping Donald Trump become president, because they were basically meant for hire. And there's a couple of good documentaries on Netflix. One's the Great Hack. It's from 2019. It's about Cambridge Analytica, and The Social Dilemma, which is about the current social media, some of the biggest developers that were in the rooms and helping to build all this stuff, discussing the problems and the actual effects of this stuff, and what the AIs that run social media, right? Because most of the things you see are actually run by AI. Most of the things that run your updates and processing and load your customized pages and do all that stuff, track the content you want, show you what you want to see, are all AIs dictating these things and trying to reach goals, as opposed to thinking about what's good and what's best. That's, for instance, you getting a whole page of information that's only things you want to see, not contrary opinions. So these are all kind of compounding, and I think over time we're going to see more law come and write more specific language for the kind of power and influence that's happening here and the danger that's here. But I don't think our current laws will work it. So I think it makes sense that these monopoly laws didn't really work here, and that the lawsuits took a big blow, because their wording and their what they're alleging doesn't actually match up to what they're trying to actually do to these companies. So definitely, Facebook was up big today, so up over $1 trillion, and we'll have more news for this to come. We'll be watching this and see how this kind of develops. I know they're not going to stop coming after these companies, so we're going to see how they change their approach to see what happens next.
I mean, with Facebook being such a big powerhouse, to not say that they haven't like monopolized a part of the market is kind of naive.
But it's by definition, because that's what I'm saying. The law says when you're a monopoly, how do you define a monopoly? Just being big isn't a monopoly. A monopoly has to cause harm, because if you truly monopolize the market, you control the pricing of an asset. If you control the pricing of an asset, you can basically make people pay whatever you want them to pay, because there really is no competition. Facebook doesn't cost anything. It's free because we're the service. If something is free, it's because you're the service. Every time you say like I use Google for free and I use Facebook for free, that's because they're taking all of your data. Cambridge Analytica that had 5,000 data points on you, they all got that from Facebook data. They extracted it all right from Facebook. So it's your data is what's most valuable. That's why it doesn't cost anything. But that's why you're not really a monopoly, because you can't prove that if Facebook and Amazon, everybody came together, but it didn't raise prices for consumers and the consumers were happy and not being harmed, you can't argue the current monopoly laws, because by definition they're not hurting anybody.
Yeah, the ones who got sued for doing monopolistic tendencies was Walmart. They were always being looked after because of that. They're always putting the prices lower because they wanted to be competitive in the market and take out all the mom and pop shops. But yeah,
right.
Facebook was definitely just huge.
Right, and that was specific to Walmart because they were hurting people. Right? They were putting people out of business and forcing people into a corner. Most people would argue that Facebook buying Instagram and WhatsApp made it more convenient for them because now all of a sudden everything's under one roof. But yeah, it's free and you don't have to pay for it, but there's other damage and influence and dangers that come in here that our current laws don't actually address. So I think we need to rework the language of those things before they can truly have the impact we want them to have. But I definitely agree. We should be bringing up, I'm not a big fan of big tech, and I'm not a big fan of how much power and control they have going forward. I think we should kind of rein that in a little.
Definitely. I mean, I know when you're over in like Silicon Valley, that the whole Stanford area, everybody knows. Well, obviously everybody knows Facebook, but their buildings are all like they're everywhere, and not only just their buildings. But one thing that I learned while I was down there several years ago was how much housing space they're purchasing, and just how much like they're pretty much providing rentals at a low cost for a certain period of time, until they then will most likely jack up the price into that same housing cost that it would be to live around there, which is pretty ridiculous. And so, if you think they're just a social media company, that's incorrect. If you think they're just a housing company, that's incorrect as well. I believe they're sticking their hands in a lot of things and potentially taking over the valley.
The other thing to note about tech companies, because we were at Menlo Park like earlier this year, Jared, right? It was like in January we were there.
Yeah.
Okay. And the thing is, like I was walking around the block one morning, and some of the like front yards, like you think you go to Silicon Valley and like there's all these beautiful houses and everything. Menlo Park, these are all just communities that apparently I was like a couple miles away from the murder capital of California for like a decade of time, and I'm like, well, why is Silicon Valley here? Why is everything so expensive? I realized when they moved there, the value of the land increased. So these communities were just everyday communities that all of a sudden now their homes are worth twice as much because Silicon Valley's there, which sounds great, except for the fact that you have a progressive tax system. So now all of a sudden they're paying twice, 3 times as much in taxes every single year. So families were leaving all the time because they're basically like, I can't afford to live here anymore. So I have to sell what I can and leave. So just because a company moves in doesn't mean it's great for everybody, right? If a community already exists there and all of a sudden the prices go up dramatically, the next thing you know, people are strapped for cash because they didn't choose for that to happen there. They probably didn't even get a vote. It's amazing how many things happen to people's communities and lives when you don't really get a say in it. Some company's going to buy up all this land and plant themselves there, and your houses are going to go up twice in value. Do I get a vote on that? No. I guess I'll just deal with that. Completely.
Yeah, and the thing is that we were walking around and we saw that there's a huge Facebook campus there, but no one was there. It wasn't in use. They're just buying a property, making these new campuses, probably adding them to their balance sheet to say they're expanding, but no one's using them. you know,
They're just huge, giant buildings everywhere, and they're just like empty, dead. Just like this is what's happening. All these people losing their homes and got to move because you just want to buy up square miles of land.
yeah, and
build your
the
big
majority
fancy
of their
campuses.
workers, they could all work from home. They're all programmers.
Exactly.
So why
Now
are
after
they making these
coronavirus,
campuses and everything? So, like,
especially after the
again,
coronavirus, it's,
all these people got, uh, went through eminent domain where they had to get pushed out of their homes, and there is now a campus that's just not in use. And one side of the freeway's nice, beautiful houses. The other side of the freeway was very close, kind of houses.
yeah. And I think it's gonna be interesting to see now that companies are like everyone can work from home, and now the coronavirus did all this and kind of disrupted all the markets and says, oh, everyone can work from home for technology. What are these companies going to do with all these campuses? Are they going to keep them staffed at 25%? Because I think the original reason everybody wanted everyone to come back into work is, yes, there's a theory that there's more motivation in being in the office, and I agree there is some truth to psychology there. But I also think that it's because, hey, we just bought all these really big buildings and we have to pay to keep the lights on. So if you're not here working, then what are we paying for? Get your ass back in the office so that when I pay that power bill, I'm paying for production. I'm not just wasting it. That I'm like, what are you going to do with all that space now? All these huge campuses, the 50 capacity, they're just going to continue to suck up power and energy and sit there? I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting dilemma because I know I was talking with my dad, and he's a director of finance, something like that, and he was saying that productivity didn't actually go down. That everybody was completely okay with continuing work at home, knowing that everything was getting done. If anything, things were kind of getting done faster. And so it kind of comes to a question of, is it better to have people at work or, in the comfort of their own home? Now, there are those people who want to come to work. They're only productive at work. By all means, understand how you function. But for if the argument is productivity, I don't think that's a factor anymore. I think it comes down to, who's occupying the building and potentially maybe for a tax write-off. I'm not exactly sure how this works, but there has to be a certain percent of the building occupied, and most likely occupied with your own workers. Who knows?
Right.
And so that would kind of make sense.
Commercial real estate really took a hit. Commercial real estate has been taking a hit, and to all the husbands that want to get away from their wives, I'm sorry that the pandemic hurt you so much, but it made you get your work done that much faster to get out of the house.
You're welcome.
I'm so much more productive when I gotta escape. Gotta get outside.
The kids are driving me crazy. I couldn't do it.
Doubled your productivity. I spent half as much time with my wife.
Okay.
So, interesting. It's gonna be interesting to see how these next couple of years, what these tech companies do all these assets.